And now we welcome Katherine Sammler with the talk Capture and Classify the Ungovernability of Soft Sea Bodies.
Okay, thank you everyone for being here. Dr. Katherine Sammler, thanks for online. Marta, thank you, and thanks to the organizers. It's really been great to be here as part of this. This paper that I'm going to talk about today is a collaboration between myself and Dr. Solomon Sebuliba, which I don't know where he went. Oh, there you are. Hi. Right, he's a postdoc here and organizing this conference as well. So what we're trying to do is examine the intersection of human-animal technical relations in kind of the knowability of the deep sea in the global production of ocean governance and seabed mining legality. And we're kind of early in our research process, but we're excited to kind of share the ideas that we're thinking about and hear some thoughts and feedback about it. But some of the themes that we're thinking with, right, and this capture and classify about governability of the types of animals we see in the deep sea. And we're really interested in kind of these land biased practices and technologies of specimen collection and species classification in relation to deep sea life forms. And specifically, we want to consider what counts as evidence in defining what is legally allowable in specifically the global ocean commons. So this area that's targeted for deep sea mining, that's actually shared by all of us. It's for all humankind, as they say in the treaty. So our main kind of focus is the Clarion-Clipperton fracture zone in the deep Pacific Ocean. And it's this really vast abyssal plain. It's about twice the size of India, and much of it's 5,000 meters deep. And it's really rich in these polymetallic nodules, which are claimed to help spur the green energy revolution that we need to push mining offshore, is kind of this argument for like greener mining in the deep sea. But it's in this area that's beyond national jurisdictions, and it's governed as this global commons by the International Seabed Authority, or ISA, which is this United Nations body established under the Law of the Sea Treaty. And so this map shows the established permit areas for prospecting by 16 nationally sponsored corporations or entities. And then there's these yellow reserved areas, and they're kind of held in reserve for access by developing countries when there's kind of technology transfer for them to access these minerals as well, to kind of portray this as equitable. Then there's these 12 gray areas, these squares, that are the areas of particular environmental interest, or APEIs. And they serve as protected areas and kind of reference zones that are specified as, quote, having a species composition comparable to that of the test mining areas, end quote. So they're meant to be beyond kind of the potential of the influences of mining and kind of serve as a baseline. And there's supposed to be then kind of this 30% of the CCZ where no mining will occur and ensure this kind of representative and stable biota of the seabed. And so, these spatial categories are then this ecosystem management plan for this entire area. However, what we see is that it's still the case that the most well-studied parts of the global ocean are those that are targeted for extraction. So during this process of exploring these areas, there's been 5,000 potential new species discovered during prospecting over the past decade. And most of these are new to science and haven't been formally described and named. And while there's permits for mining extraction that might be evaluated as early as this year, because right now they're prospecting, but it will potentially move forward towards full-scale extraction any day now, as it's been for quite some time. Nobody knows when this will happen. But the ISA is posed to make these decisions soon. But yeah, it's really unclear, and the rules governing the industry are still being negotiated through the ISA, We don't actually know what's going to be allowed. So the permits require, of course, environmental impact and recovery assessments, including the identification and cataloging of the deep sea species that are there and will be impacted, kind of surveying the ecosystem's physical characteristics and the connectivity between ecosystems, and quantifying the baseline conditions and what kind of impacts the activity will cause. But the science needed to produce that knowledge is still very incomplete. So much of this work is really hampered by the depth and the expanse of this abyssal plain, but it's also these very forms that life takes there and the kind of radical difference of the animals and how they exhibit different traits. And so there's these kind of traditional techniques of sample collection that we believe are challenged by these kind of newly encountered bodily forms, and that many deep sea organisms are very delicate. So the kind of gelatinous bodies of jellies and octopus and squid and all sorts of different body types don't always survive traditional sample collection techniques. We often see the robotic arms on remotely operated vehicles crush their bodies, or that the organisms themselves disintegrate when they're brought to the much reduced surface pressure on the ship. So some animals are just very rare, and scientists are rather dubious about whether they should be collected, even one animal, because they've only been spotted maybe twice in 10 years. So we see a proliferation in all kinds of technologies for measuring and monitoring the ocean, but yet, right, it's very large. Specifically, the deep sea is very distant and has this great depth that makes it really hard to study the ecosystems. And the ocean governance that relies on this baseline data, it suffers because of it. So in the deep sea data, it's very sparse. The ecosystems are very vast. And the impacts for any kind of activity have the potential to cross political boundaries. So at the same time, the ocean ecosystems are under multiple anthropogenic threats that we've heard about in some other talks, that we're seeing many extractive industries moving further and further offshore, including fishing and mining and other energy production. So the deepest oceans are in this high seas commons, where governance is potentially weaker because it's still being negotiated, and potentially more fragmented as we see a lot of different parties trying to sort out, who can benefit from that space. And so then the knowledge that is required for managing the extractive industries there is partial, uneven, and very difficult to produce. So we're trying to think through how knowledge is produced here for the deep sea. And we've seen an oceanic turn in the social sciences and humanities in the last quarter century. And much of that has been represented in this conference. But we think that there's less kind of research focused on the deep sea because a lot of that data is only now being produced. And that analyzing the eco and biological politics of measuring and governing marine biodiversity is kind of an important new arena in need of environmental governance research. And with global, political, legal, and ecological implications to this work. So this project, which we're still developing, but Solomon and I have begun to kind of collect and analyze some of the data available from the ISA, including their deep sea specimen database and kind of the handful of thus far submitted environmental impact assessments from these companies. And then the relevant kind of broader taxonomic debate over how to define the life forms seen in the ocean, whether they fit into kind of the standard taxonomic knowledge developed on land. And so what kind of meaningful categories that life gets divided into by biology and taxonomy, and who that might be meaningful for, and how kind of deep sea life challenges these categories of biological models. And so in tracing then how deep sea knowledge is produced, we're interested in how samples are collected and the biologic life gets collected and then constructed as evidence, and kind of the invisibilities and biases inherent in this evidence that gets put forth. So this is, this idea of producing this knowledge for governance is what makes the environmental impact assessments central to our project, because they are representations of this evidence, and they are supposed to establish a baseline of what the ecosystem looks like before mining, and provide evidence to assess the impacts after the mining is finished. So we began by looking at the ISA guidelines for the impact assessments and what kind of recommendations they're offering to the companies or the kind of data they need. And we're now examining them against the reports submitted by, for example, German Federal Institute for Geosciences and Natural Resources, China's Minmetals Corporation, and Nauru's partner, the Metals Company.
We are fixing the screen.
Sorry. Okay. Yeah, so formally these activities are meant to the kinds of activities that we see here of testing some of the machinery. They're meant to establish kind of what the deep sea looks like before mining, and hopefully then what it would look like after mining, after it recovered. But in practice, they're actually testing the mining technology, not just taking baseline measurements, and they're evaluating their equipment and preparing for extraction. So exploration is kind of doing two things at once. It's producing environmental knowledge and developing extraction capacity. And the machines being tested are this collector vehicle and the riser system that connects them to the surface, and support vessel. Thinking about plumes and what other kind of impacts it has. They're often kind of smaller versions of what's being planned for the next step of commercial mining. And the submitted reports often emphasize that these prototype systems produce little significant impact. So despite the permitting process distinguishing between exploration and exploitation, this prospecting already creates impacts like species removal, habitat disturbance, and sediment plumes. Also adding sound and light pollution to the mix, to reference the talk yesterday. And so the baseline is being established at the same time as it is being altered. And some of the assessments submitted kind of orient their analysis toward a future where mining must proceed regardless, using the reports to argue for mining readiness rather than an honest, well, what we would say would be an honest evaluation of the uncertainty. And so these environmental impact assessments are not just measuring impacts, they're defining what counts as a baseline, what counts as acceptable disturbance, and ultimately helping to justify the transition from exploration to extraction. And we argue that EIAs are not neutral assessments of environmental impacts, but we're not the first. There's a long history of critical scholarship pointing to the many issues with the process, such as exclusionary consultation and dismissing local knowledges that are deemed non-expert, lacking participatory inputs. But there's also larger critiques about the environmental impact assessment's role in broader capitalist relations with nature that kind of dictate what natures are seeable and valued via kind of Western scientific metrics of counting and categorizing life in a way that assumes fungibility in preserving some ecosystems while slating others as sacrifice zones of natures deemed killable. And so the deep sea is an environment that is very difficult to sample, measure, and classify. And there's kind of few designated stakeholders and a very narrow set of knowledges that are being produced about it. And we argue that the knowledges that are produced are very central to the production of seabed mining legality. So exploring the ISA's deep data database is an important component of our project. In their own words, this platform is meant to, quote, host all the data related to deep seabed activities, particularly those collected by the contractors during their exploration activities and other relevant environmental and resources related data for the area, entire region. So it aggregates data from contractors, including sampling data, species identification, abundance, geolocation, and depth, habitat data, including whether things live in the sediment or the nodules or the water column, and they determine what kind of collection methods were used for some of the data. And then they've tried to kind of standardize how the taxonomy is reported, and have linked to other global databases such as the World Register of Marine Species. And in theory, then, this creates a shared evidence base for assessing impacts of deep sea mining. However, I said at the top, the most well-studied parts of the ocean are those that are targeted for extraction. And so, given the expense of deep sea operations, the responsibility of companies for much of the data collection, and we can see from this data set from Rabone et al., which includes the ISA's deep data database, as well as some supplementary data that they've added from the literature. There's surprisingly few samples taken from the gray squares, which are the areas of particular environmental interest. And this kind of, reinforces this paradox that knowledge is following the extraction priorities. We're also looking at other types of potential biases in the data, looking at the sampling techniques where different collection methods can capture different of animals, different kind of bodily forms, and that they each cover different scales and geographies of capture. So some can only take deep data in a very small area, and some can capture large areas, but maybe only get specific types of animals. And we're trying to consider what body types might escape these grasping technologies, and that each method can sample in different habitat types, such as the water column, on the seafloor, deep within the sediment, or the kind of intermittent ecosystem like the nodules themselves that sit between the seafloor and the water column. And we're examining the connection between the technologies, the sample collection, and what this means for governance. But one aspect of this connection is kind of this broader knowledge system that this all sits within. And this includes the instability of the category of species itself, where political scientist Rafi Youat, who writes on global biodiversity governance, argues, quote, "The miracle in a way is that species works at all, given the wide heterogeneity of definitions, both in the current and the historical species concept debates in biology. Species are a cornerstone of evolutionary theory and of biodiversity science and politics, but the different meanings of the term require ongoing concatenation and lamination," end quote. So there's both morphological, body type, and genetic challenges of determining a singular definition of species. And there's kind of debates around the dozens of proposed boundaries between different taxa. And this is partly why many ocean species are still relatively unknown. There's kind of new and arcane forms that particularly challenge the ordering of life and how to define the difference. Sexual reproduction, or asexual reproduction, such as cloning, also that we see in the deep sea can challenge this idea of what belongs in one species or another. We can see from the deep data database that the taxonomic resolution is uneven, with many organisms not yet identifiable or fully described to the species level. And these uncertainties are then obstacles, potentially. I guess we hope they're obstacles to the governance mechanisms that are allowing seabed mining to continue. But it's really important because species as a category is used to designate protection status. So to conclude, we believe that the deep sea's, magical life forms, very enigmatic, difficult to identify by looking at them, but also by measuring them in different ways, such as this cyniophore, because they have really unique bodily forms, different reproductive complexities, and as discussed earlier, the variable sensory milieu, that it really requires a reorienting between how humans are regarding their relations with nature and some more kind of dynamic legal regimes to manage, respond to, and protect oceanic life and its radical difference. And there's kind of this larger context of seabed mining, which is pressuring this governance. This isn't happening in a vacuum. We're not understanding the deep sea separate from this initiative towards seabed mining. That we then see the metrics of naming and counting marine life, determining which life forms are worth protecting or are deemed killable as part of a kind of evolving biopolitical gaze at sea with really broad impacts for our current moment of biodiversity decline. I don't know. I don't know how to drop the video.
What's that?
You can end it. It's the last slide. Just a political commentary for the U.S. So we're trying to continue to think critically with this data and embed it in theory. And yeah, we're looking forward to conversations and critiques and feedback. So yeah, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Kate, for your talk. And now we have 10 minutes for questions. Okay, we go with Nick.
I have a whole bunch of questions. I'll pick one. I'm thinking about like the move toward like better involvement of say stakeholders or rights holders in co-governance or co-production of knowledge. It's really hard. It's still a challenge. But then when I think about a commons owned by all of humanity, how do you even conceptualize that? I know we talked a little bit about the moon and outer space as sort of similar. I can't even wrap my head around that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we have a way currently to engage entire population of humanity, but perhaps since I'm trying to challenge the idea of species, like how do we even define humanity has long been a political question. But I mean, at least kind of the way that things are functioning through the ISA is that these, corporate sponsored companies or, they're kind of private-public partnerships are responsible for informing the stakeholders. And so they send their EIAs to some group of people in Germany for perhaps the German submission to receive feedback. So it is, I mean, humanity is represented through the nation state for everything in the UN, which also misses many peoples. So, tribes in the US don't, even though they're sovereign, some of them are recognized as sovereign nations within the US, don't have specific representation through the United States government or their own ability to communicate to the UN and be stakeholders more directly. So yeah, I think then, I mean, for me, the United States isn't even signed on to the Law of the Sea. So I have a very challenging time exerting my stakeholderness for this commons. But yeah, right now the system would be through the nation state.
Are there other ways that it could be done besides through geopolitical classifications? This is me just entering.
Yeah.
Like not even knowing how to.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that, I mean, from field work I've done in New Zealand, where the Maori tribes have needed to exert their sovereignty over the coastal area, not that far from shore, but the near shore, and push back against the nationalization of that space. I mean, they had tens of thousands of people in the street, and it was actually the start of the Maori political party in New Zealand because of this disenfranchisement of their coastal space. So people are very passionate about the ocean, and I think there's ways to motivate them to become stakeholders, and I hope everyone here recognizes themselves as stakeholder for the deep sea commons. And finding moments to kind of exert that in different ways, I think is something we have to be creative with. And yeah, I don't have the answers. I don't think we're going to get all stakeholders in one room at one time. Thanks.
Ivan?
Yeah, just you mentioned one thing that I was thinking yesterday when you presented the presentation of mapping. And it's regarding the sentence you said it's knowledge is following destruction priorities. And generally we tend to think about knowledge as a means for protecting. And the same as, for instance, in geography, I'm also a geographer, so mapping is one of our key tools for knowing, explaining, and so on. But I was thinking about the question of the right of not being mapped nowadays, and also against the production of knowledge if this has to entail the destruction of what you are analyzing, studying. And this is, I mean, for us, it's a kind of, it's exploding our minds because we are, I mean, we are precisely creating knowledge, defending knowledge, but somehow I think that we should also advocate for the other. Okay,
Yeah.
so that was just a comment on that. And if you
No, I have thoughts on it, but yeah, sorry for the mess, right? It does kind of break our brains as people in universities studying knowledge. But right, knowledge is not a monolith, it's a multiplicity. There's different kinds of knowledge. And I think like anti-colonial perspective will recognize, that reminds us that some knowledge has been very violent and that what types of knowledge get produced is impacted by who's producing the knowledge and for what. And so we can try to produce better types of knowledge for better purposes that are non-violent to vulnerable populations of human and animals and plants. So I think we have to be incredibly reflexive through our, positions of, in universities as producers and sharers of knowledge, and really return to think about and take critique about the kinds of knowledge that we are producing and promoting. Yeah, thanks.
The other thing that Ivan was saying, because is one of the things I was thinking is how can we try to like do something about deep sea mining, because in a way I feel like data is the way it's used in science is also a creator of uncertainty, because you were saying like how ISA contemplates like a few categories that you have to fill to kind of have a species recognized, like the position, and I assume all these taxonomic categories they have. But at the same time, whenever you publish this, then there will be a new paper that probably has its reasons to exist, that will say like, but this is not enough data, we will need more data to acknowledge that this species is maybe, I don't know, the temperature, and they didn't get the temperature, so, and probably they did, but I mean, like, whenever you get some data, there is some data that has been left out. So there is, by the process of getting data, you are creating instantly a scientific uncertainty. And this scientific uncertainty, as far as I'm seeing in these debates, is also the justification for industry to say, but to use those gaps to justify their position. So I feel like using the same methods that the same data collection methods that has been justifying capitalists and industries to do extractivist activities, to kind of not letting them doing. I don't know if I'm explaining myself, but I feel like it's a bit a contradiction to try to. I don't know. For me, it's kind of like a contradiction to try to go against deep sea mining through the methods of science, because science will, data collection will always have uncertainty, and this uncertainty is normally used by companies to justify their actions in a way. So I feel it's a bit complex, and I don't know how to do it. And I feel like you were speaking before about humanity, and I feel maybe this humanity category can be something, because in a way, it's a very controversial concept, but at the same time is who is this humanity that is wanting to mine, and they need like a high invest on capital and technology, and this is not humanity. It's
Yeah.
like maybe 10 people in the world that has the money to create it. So I don't know how to like think about deep sea mining, because I think every kind of way to enter it is controversial, and it's not like, wait, have you thought about it? Like, what's your...
Yeah, I mean, I would say no to deep sea mining. I don't think that the justifications for doing it and needing those metals, I don't believe it. I think it's being manufactured. This need for metals as the green transition, when we're seeing, you know, actually just more bombs being built with the same metals. So, but I think that uncertainty is as powerful, like knowledge and what type of knowledge you produce is very powerful, but uncertainty is also incredibly powerful. The gaps in knowledge, the gaps in data can be used for different purposes. And so for the types of operations that use the precautionary principle, that uncertainty can mean stop. Just as much as for other industries or other governance regimes that don't have the precautionary principle, uncertainty can mean, well, let's go. So the burden of proof shifts. So for the US, we don't use precautionary principle. The burden of proof is on the government to say it will harm, some industry will harm. And so if that's not proven, then it's just go ahead. Versus much of the other world, the rest of the world uses precautionary principle, where the burden of proof is for the company to say it will not harm. And so those different regimes produce really different outputs using uncertainty. There was something else you said I want to comment on, but I kind of just left. So maybe it'll come back to me and we can discuss over coffee.
Katherine, thanks. That was really rich and interesting. And you mentioned at the end that there's a recovery range of tens of thousands of years. That's a massive variation. And if it's tens of years, it's like large forestry area where you set up a felling regime where the recovery rate is 50 years and you harvest the blocks accordingly.
Yeah.
So what's the likely distribution of this recovery rate across the different areas? Is most of it 10 years or most of it 10,000?
So that range is partially dependent on which animals you are paying attention to or know about or counting. So I think the fairly recent discovery that the nodules themselves are a habitat, and that those form a couple of millimeters per 1,000 years. So by removing all the nodules, you are removing a habitat. It's mostly slimy, oozy, squishy whale guts and other things at the bottom. And so to have a bit of structure for animals to lay eggs in or attach to, those just won't exist anymore. And so anything that uses those habitats wouldn't recover until these metals precipitate out of the water and form around old shark's tooths and stuff. They're really amazing. But so, yeah, like determining the recovery rate, like as an entire ecosystem, yeah, that's going to be tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. But also these types, I mean, what they're finding out about events and the deep sea vents and things is that there's also such great distances between ecosystems that reseeding is also potentially unlikely. So we just don't know how things get around because the currents are very sluggish. It's like molasses with all that pressure. It's like moving through jello or something. So like how zooplankton can even get to a new place isn't well known.
Thanks.
Thank you.
We have a question by Nico.
Just a thought or cautionary comment really about, yes, I totally agree about the debatable nature of the justification for the green transition. We need these minerals, blah, blah, blah. It's the search for new species that just reminds me of the bioprospecting versus biopiracy debate. The question about who owns knowledge and how will humanity benefit and so on. And ultimately, in that particular kind of debate, let's search the rainforests for X, Y, Z. It's the pharmaceutical companies that benefit.
Yeah.
And that's where money will come from, and that's where governments will support it, and we can have the treaties. But at the moment of the current geopolitical circumstances, that's the argument that's going to win, and that's where the money will come from.
Yeah.
New
right.
species, not for humanity, but for really a story.
Thanks, Nigel. That actually reminded me of the other part of the question that I wanted to answer about how evidence is produced through sample collection. Is you need the body of the animal, and then you put it in a jar and put it in a museum, and that this whole structuring of knowledge is based on these colonial histories of biological capture in the New World and other places, and then organizing them into categories and jars behind glass. And so this tidy little organization of nature in this way is very useful for certain types of projects, including owning genetic strings or, yeah.
You manipulate it through two processes, and you own the intellectual property.
Yeah. So this idea of like even what counts as evidence and how this information is organized has a very long tradition of Western science entangled in colonial projects of organizing nature for specific types of use.